everybody! Yes, Cole here, and here we are for my second of the X-Men Decade by Decade Roundtable reviews. We're going to be looking at the 1970s. Now, I'm here with an almost completely different cast, an all-new, all-different cast, if you will. I have, from last time, Joe. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
All good, all good. I am joined by my friend I actually know in life, Ben.
Hi everyone.
And I am joined by the late edition, only last night indeed, Andrew.
Hey there, guys.
Yes, so it's quite funny that we all come for different things. Joe's one of the guys I emailed on YouTube, Andrew's from Twitter, and Ben's from meeting at uni.
Reality.
So, yes, from reality, not the cyberspace. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. This is the 70s. This is where the X-Men gets to become the X-Men as we know them. This is where the X-Men become basically the X-Men that existed since, and pretty much everything's been a rip-off of this since. This is stuff from the 80s. This is where the stories get good. This is where Claremont takes over pretty much from the second issue, and that's when the X-Men truly begin in many eyes. The 60s were something that got better, and the sales got better, but it wasn't. The true popularity and the true quality of what we think of the X-Men did not begin until this second run. This, of course, began with the all-new, all-different. Now, the first half of this decade, in fact, from 70 to 75, it was all reprints. The original book,
Really?
the original book was cancelled, as far as I know. And
I thought they did some extra stuff, but I didn't think they did reprints.
I'm pretty sure it was mostly reprints.
Yeah, there's a ton of reprints.
Yeah, they basically they continued the numbering, but they did it for reprints, which was bizarre. You couldn't get away with that today. But they continued to reprint it, and it's almost funny. Like, X-Men has a lot of similarities in my mind to Star Trek. It's the same as that, where it became more popular in its reruns as it did to its original thing. So they were like, "Oh crap, we're gonna bring it back." So they brought back Len Wein, and he decided to do an entirely different cast of international mutants because they wanted to bring in the foreign audiences, or so it says, and he wanted to create a far more diverse cast, which is what we got. And we got an even more diverse cast than what would be the actual set cast, because, well, the original all-new, all-different team from Giant Size X-Men #1, the famed Giant Size X-Men #1, of course, we have the introduction of pretty much, some of the most famous X-Men characters ever. We have, of course, Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Wolverine, and Banshee. Now, they'd be the main ones. But on top of that, we had Sunfire, who was another villain like Banshee from the 60s.
Nobody likes Sunfire anymore.
The costume alone. I'm not sure what
Yeah.
that's supposed to be. He's some sort of...
I think he still kept it, right? Or is it just
Yeah,
like
I
a
don't
flaming
know.
head?
No, that's Age of Apocalypse. But he's continued that kind of... I'm not even sure what it's supposed to be, this kind of squid look on his face. I'm not even sure what it's meant to be.
Very Japanese, I guess.
Yeah.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Why did you say that? It's very Japanese.
Where he is Japanese, and the other representative is from the Native Americans, Thunderbird, who wouldn't last long either.
I actually like Thunderbird, even though he died.
Yeah,
I liked him a little bit.
Yeah. Apparently the story goes that he was too similar, to Wolverine, and they were like, no, you can't have two, bad.
They didn't want any Native Americans, so they decided to get him off the American property. So yeah.
Well, reading All New Deal different straight off the bat, you can tell the difference. I mean, it's not Claremont quite yet, but you can see what Len Wein is trying to do and where the X-Men is going to go. Because straight away, I mean, no longer are they all wasps, obviously. And then on top of that, they're all conflicting with each other and all fighting with each other, and straight away they just don't get along. Sunfire refuses to come because he's like, "Oh, I'm not going on a goddamn rescue mission." And then straight away Thunderbird's mouthing everybody off. He's calling Storm a broad, he's calling Wolverine a midget, Nightcrawler a demon, and all this sort of stuff, and he's just mouthing off Cyclops and stuff. Just Thunderbird is hilarious in the first issue. But the story is, basically, the original X-Men have been captured by an island, a living island called Krakoa, and... we'd find out later that there was another team, but that's for another time. Professor X rounded up a new group of mutants, which were what we thought was the second, but in fact the third group of X-Men at that point. And in they went. And now the original X-Men that they went to rescue did not include Beast, because of course he'd joined the Avengers and turned blue by this point.
Yeah.
But other than that, and then Havoc and Polaris were with them, and then they went to go rescue them. And the island seemed a lot less menacing than it did in the retcon later on. But they did have, some strife.
Oh, I hate that retcon.
They had some giant crabs and living plant men and stuff like that. And then they them, and they solved this by having Storm throw her lightning into Polaris, who charged it, and able to use that to reverse the magnetic poles or something, and send the island flying into space. They got off onto an ice raft created by Iceman, and they saved the day. And so a brand new X-Men team were introduced. So straight away, I'm going to go around and say, what is your thoughts? Any things you want to say about Giant Size X-Men #1? I'll start with Andrew.
Actually, I was going to ask a question for you guys. Who do you guys think is a better artist? Dave more like a quintessential X-Men artist, Dave Cockrum or the John Byrne? What do you think a bit more?
John Byrne.
Yeah, John Byrne.
All right, John.
So because
Ben?
Lem Wein's art is more sketchy. Not Lem Wein, sorry. Dave Cockrum is so much sketchy. John Byrne is so much cleaner, and what he did with the look of the characters is pretty much how the characters stayed for a very long time.
Oh yeah.
I'd have to agree. Burns is a lot more distinct, and I don't know, just a preference.
Clean.
Yeah,
is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think Dave Cockrum was like a great person for character creation, and he was a great storyteller. But Byrne is the one guy that people always go to.
Oh
if you think of the X-Men, he's the guy.
Because that was when Claremont was hitting on all cylinders, and the art was hitting on all cylinders. It was just that legendary run that everybody remembers, and it obviously includes, the massive story arcs we'll get into in a bit. Also, I think we should all be glad to Dave Cockrum for the redesign of Wolverine to begin with, which is the Wolverine we all think of. Because when he originally appeared in Hulk, when he originally appeared in Hulk, he had whiskers and shorter ears and not the Batman white eyes and stuff. But this is where Wolverine
could have worked, but
And of course, he wasn't popular. People hated him to begin with.
Really?
From what I can tell, people did not like this character to begin with, and he was.
I know Dave Cockrum hated drawing him, but I didn't know everybody else hated him.
He was in the back. He was very much. Well, Claremont and that didn't, but the readership were like, who the hell is this scrawny guy and whatever. It was Cyclops' book, and later it became Cyclops and Jean Grey's book, and then the rest were an ensemble cast. That was kind of the order of things, and Wolverine wouldn't become prominent until, much later on. I think Dark Phoenix, I'd have to say. But anyway, Andrew, your thoughts on Giant Size X-Men #1?
Actually, looking back at it now, I think they took a really just ballsy move by bringing foreign cast members as part of the main X-Men. Because thinking about it, just at the time, I don't think it really could have worked like that. Bringing a black woman into comics at the time, and then doing all this stuff. I'm surprised it worked, but I
mean, that was the revolution that was happening at the time. It wouldn't have worked in the 60s, but in the 70s, they were already doing that stuff over on Green Lantern and stuff like that. So, it was a time of revolution in a way.
But what I really love about this run is how much they're able to put in these 3-part story arcs, and how much it's quintessential to everything that they do nowadays. They always go back to the Hellfire Club stuff that they do, Juggernaut, Sentinels, all this crazy stuff that happens here, and these guys don't really have much of what we have today. And I know everybody basically says they hate Cyclops at this time, that he wasn't really a well-developed character, but looking back at him, he actually did have some pretty good character moments, and I didn't hate him. I just didn't think he was.
Oh, I quite like Cyclops. I never had that distaste for him. I think what it came from was the fact that he was never fleshed out in sort of the other media things. I think that's where that comes from. But in the comics, they do good stuff with him. And he was the main character of the book, for the majority of this run. I'll go to Ben next. What about you, Giant Size X-Men #1?
It was the start of a new era, and it was a really bold move, as you say, bringing a black woman in the form of Storm. But we've also got a Canadian, a Russian, a Native American, and a demonic-looking German. It was a bold move to rebrand with the new cast. And I think at the end of the book it says something like, what are we going to do with 13 X-Men? Find out next issue. It really was a game changer, but it really did. For me, it was the start of what was going to become, a great run of X-Men.
Yeah, it was the start of the X-Men. Very much. One thing you said about well, you said Nightcrawler, that could have gone down really bad if people had taken that the wrong way.
German demon guy.
Yeah, the demonic German. Oh, what are you trying to say? But I think the most revolutionary for the time was Colossus, a Russian. Now, of course, they called him Rasputin, which, that's like calling a German Hitler. But, at the same time, that was the real revolutionary one. And even when they go to him, they say, should my powers belong to the state and all that kind of stuff. So he's very much concerned with that. And, of course, he saves his sister, which would come along later. Joe, what about you, Giant Size?
Oh.
Well, I really like this issue in terms of the dynamics of the characters, because now when you read the X-Men, for the most part, everybody gets along pretty nicely until Schism comes along or finishes. But in this issue here, this is where you have a random group of people with different agendas, and the way they bicker and they fight, it shows you start from there, and then you see where they're at now. There's a lot of character growth, a lot of development within them, and I really enjoyed watching them just constantly fight.
Oh, Thunderbird was hilarious during this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just the way Wolverine was there just to push buttons. It's like
he
was
Thunderbird
there to
whine if he can't track things. He'd just be like, "Why can't I do it, Cyclops?"
Yeah.
He's got it.
And straight away, Wolverine is right there with his nicknames Irish and Elf, and they become terms of endearment later on. But at this point, they were almost taking the mickey. So yeah, my thoughts on Giant Size are obviously the X-Men as they became. I mean, some of the characters are kind of different to how they would eventually become. Like Wolverine just seems like he's just a Canadian agent. There's no speciality or mystery about him. He's just like, hey, screw you. I'm going with this Xavier guy. He's paying me more money. It sounds like a bad deal. And then they're like, oh, we'll send our guys after you, which should come up later. And Storm's like this goddess who believes herself to be a god in Africa, and then finally, they bring her together. It very much seems like the team was thrown together. They weren't, grown up together. They weren't a family like the last team. They were thrown together for this mission by Xavier. Thunderbird's introduction is, again, just... He turns to Xavier, the first word he said to him, how the hell did a cripple get out here? Just funny stuff.
I miss Thunderbird, yeah.
Yeah, well, we got his son once he realised killing him was a bad idea.
Now he's a murderous psycho, but, it's good, either way.
Yeah, well... So then we go into the second issue, and the second issue, right off the bat, Len Wein has already gone. Well, he's given the story points, but he's gone on to do other stuff that he wanted to do. And pretty much from the second issue of this run on, it's Chris Claremont, and he's doing the dialogue. And what's weird about the second issue, not only the second run is where... the second mission is where Thunderbird blows up, so he didn't last very long. Obviously, they were like, okay, yes, no. Because Sunfire disappears at the start of the first one, and then straight away Thunderbird blows up. So that solves that issue. So they say at the end of Giant Size, say, what are we going to do with 13 X-Men? Well, that pretty much solves itself at this point, because one goes, one dies, and then the other originals just turn around, I don't know where to go, Xavier. Sorry, we want to live our lives.
We don't like this guy anymore, we're just going to do our own thing.
Yeah, bye. Especially Jean and stuff like that. They're just like, bye, no, see ya. This comes out of nowhere. I mean, was Krakoa that, haunting?
Maybe you can't blame Jean. She did have everyone hitting on her in the 60s, so...
Yeah, sexual harassment, and all that.
Well, I kind of like the fact that all the old cast left, just because it gave us the opportunity to learn the new cast.
Yeah, that was the intention.
Yeah.
Going on from that as well, it also... going back, in the last podcast we mentioned that, the Institute didn't really feel like a school, but it did give that idea of, the next generation. So I liked the change in the roster.
Second class. I mean, obviously, this is the roster that, made the X-Men famous. But I'm just, at the time, I mean, it's funny because comic fans have never changed, and you realise that, because I remember reading the letter pages, and there's letters from people going, I want the old X-Men back, what have you done?
The letter pages is their version of the internet. But,
it's like, we hate these X-Men, we want the old ones back, they were so much better. And it's just hindsight, it's just brilliant, to being able to read that and going, man, you must feel like an idiot if you're still alive right now. But I get it, the team just seemed to do that out of nowhere, and it seems just, again, to get them out of the way, and, especially even says to Scott, come with us, and he's like, no, this is all I know, and he stays up all night thinking about it and stuff. Again, straight away with this, I mean, I don't know whether it was Len Wein who plotted it or Claremont for his writing, but straight away we have this character introspective, this more kind of brooding, more kind of character-based stuff. See, my thing with the original first run is the character stuff is great, but the villains and stuff like that are... The first one we have a Living Island, and of course the second one we have Count Nefaria, who's always fun to follow.
He's more of an Avengers villain now, but yeah.
Yeah, Count Nefaria, who's basically twiddling his mustache. He's one step away to evil.
I'm evil!
Yeah, but Thunderbird's death at the end of issue 3 is quite tragic. He's trying to bash through the plane, and he ends up bashing something too hard, and the plane blows up. And I was like, oh, shit. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Wait, what?
Yeah. The Native American dies?
Yeah.
Second issue? Oh, man.
So it seems like they were killing off the characters who weren't popular with the writers at that point, because obviously the Giant Size probably hadn't even come out by that point yet.
Yeah. Are we going to cover this issue by issue, or are we going to go over by
No, I'm going to go general. I was just, the first couple. So yeah, originally the writing team with Len Wein and Dave Cockrum, but again, straight away, Claremont took over, and it was him and Dave Cockrum for a while. The first arc was pretty much the second Genesis. They had a bunch of random stuff, and straight away, it seems like Claremont was a fan of the Adams run, the Neil Adams Len Wein run, Roy Thomas run, because straight away, we've got things like the Savage Land, the Sentinels, and all that stuff. Of course, it's the introduction at this point of Moira. Not Moira. Let me say the name right. Moira McTaggart. And she's introduced. Now, what's funny is when she shows up as the housekeeper. And then later on, when you find out, obviously, what we did after the fact, that she's this big, brilliant genetic scientist and whatever, they're like, she gave that up to be a freaking butler, which is hilarious stuff. I'm
surprised that instead of wearing like a science coat, she just wears like an all-out like yellow and pink like costume instead of being like an all-out scientist.
Yeah. Well, she's a bit kooky. And straight away, we introduction to Muir Island, in which we get the introduction of Multiple Man, and also Alex and Lorna actually go there as well, which would come back later in the Pheonix Saga. So they go and live at Muir Island with her, and actually there is where we get the return of Magneto eventually. They didn't go straight the way back to him, but eventually they did, and basically he was a baby. He was turned into a baby by... Who turned him into a baby?
Wasn't it like Eric the Red?
No.
I think it was...
Avenger. Because I think he fought the Avengers, and then, yeah, somebody made him into a baby to end the threat, which is, I'll give him points for originality. But Eric the Red shows up during the Pheonix Saga, or the start of the Pheonix Saga, regrows him, and then they go to Muir Island, for some other reason, I can't remember why, and they're like, oh shit, because Magneto's there, and pretty much from that point onwards, not quite, but to this point onwards, Magneto becomes Magneto as we imagine him. He kicks the crap out of them. What they say is because they're not as good, teammates, which makes sense because they didn't grow up together and all that. So Magneto basically whips them because they all fight as individuals, which is stuff that's really nice. Whenever they fight Magneto, they always bring up the fact that they fight one-on-one, they don't fight as a team. And that gets their ass kicked, especially when you got two guys, one who's made of metal and one who's got metal bones. You're not going to do well against the master of magnetism. He basically wipes the floor with them. And then, of course, we get into the Pheonix Saga. But first, is there anything anybody wants to say about the pre-Pheonix Saga run? I'll go in reverse. I'll go to Joe first.
Well, for me, that was like classic battles, because you had the Magneto fight in the volcano, and then you had the team getting separated, where you had Jean Grey and the Beast escaping, wondering if the X-Men survived or not. And then
it was like a total death thing.
First time the X-Men died, quotation marks.
Exactly. And then
and
the Savage Land fight was awesome too. Everything from that was, this was like classic battles along the way.
Yeah.
And then it was just like a nice roller coaster ride. It was just always
really
entertaining.
good character stuff at the same time. I mean, straight away, the whole stuff with Moira and Banshee is introduced, and they're off taking picnics and whatever else. And Wolverine never takes his mask off for the first few.
Really?
No, he keeps his mask completely on until I think a Christmas issue is when you first see him out of mask. And then you're like, oh crap, he's an old man. You never realised, or a 40-year-old.
That was actually because Dave Cockrum designed the face, because I think it was John Byrne or Len Wein. They weren't really sure what Logan was going to look like, and originally he wasn't going to have like the horned hair, but eventually it was decided it was going to fit the mask. So yeah,
I never got that. Did he just stick that way after he left the mask on for too long? Or
I believe so.
Either that or he gelled it like that. We don't know.
I think they're going to turn him into a teenager at first, and then decide it was a bad
they
idea.
said he was going to be a teenager. Then the idea came around that apparently he was going to be an evolved wolf, and not a mutant. He was going to be an Wolverine that had evolved.
Then I think I even heard a rumor from somebody that he was supposed to be he was like mutated from an actual Wolverine, and then did this. It's kind of weird what they were thinking, but it turns out they made some right decisions afterwards.
Yeah, thank God they didn't do that.
Yep.
Yeah, but some interesting stuff there. Yeah, Ben, your thoughts on the before Pheonix Saga run?
Yeah, I haven't got too much to say. I mean, we did get the introduction of Proteus in this era.
Oh yeah.
And and the Shadow King too. So we did get some good villains. Definitely a step up from the '60s from Unis the Untouchable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Straight the way, but what Claremont does is he takes the ideas from the '60s and matures them and makes them a little more complex. Straight the way, the new villains plus the old villains seem a lot more rounded, seem a lot more more of a threat, which is awesome stuff. Yeah, Proteus. Speaking of that, Moira's son.
Oh, I love Proteus.
Who just goes nuts and they have no choice but to kill him, which is interesting. Straight the way, Colossus is he's not happy with the fact that this team has made him kill, and that would come up later during Mutant Massacre. Andrew, what about you before the Pheonix Saga?
I think before the Pheonix Saga is just straight up fun stuff. They go into how you see with the Star Trek, the Imperial Guard stuff with the Shi'ar. It just felt pure Star Trek, and it was just really fun stuff. There'd be that last minute save thing. They'd have those big fights. They already get started the Alpha Flight stuff with Wolverine almost right away. They bring back guys like Mesmero, like you said, the volcano fight stuff. Overall, it was just straight up fun, dramatic stuff that I kind of just really liked.
Yeah. So pretty after the first few runs, after the first few issues, the art is taken over by a young artist at the time, an unknown artist named John Byrne, who was quite funny. If you read the introduction thing, he says, "I'll try and live up to Dave Cockrum," like Byrne. Hindsight again. So yeah, then we go into the Pheonix Saga. Now I think the Pheonix Saga is definitely overshadowed by the Dark Phoenix Saga, obviously, and the Pheonix Saga itself is a little more
complex.
Yeah, silly. That's the best. It's a little more comic booky in a way. Do you know what I mean? I mean, straight away we have the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. And our stuff with the Shi'ar is taken right from Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff like that, which was really popular at the time. Except the book Spaceship and all that stuff, and the whole Lilandra stuff is fun. But the Shi'ar Imperial Guard are well, straight the way we have. Apparently, they are a takeoff of the Legion of superheroes, and they all had a counterpart. And Gladiator is basically a knockoff of Superman, except with a giant blue.
Except the big,
giant blue mohawk.
I forgot that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I find funny is the symbol on his chest resembles the actual Gladiator symbol from the Gladiator TV show. So, where did they get that from?
Really?
That? Yeah. But again, there's a bunch of them. So the Pheonix Saga basically begins where they're in space fighting. Who's the villain? It's one of the ones who was brought back in Second Coming. One of the anti types. They're in space fighting him with Dr. Cornelius, that's his name. Then there's some sort of sun radiation and their landing craft's broken and stuff, so there's no way they can land and safely protect themselves. Jean says she could do it with her psychic, so she has them all go in the cargo hold where they're safe, and she flies the ship. But in the process, is reportedly at this point killed, and is brought back to life with the cosmic entity, the Pheonix Force, in her, and she comes out of the water. I am Pheonix, and for that point, Jean Grey was epic. No, Marvel Girl was no more. She was Pheonix from this point onwards. Then, of course, later on it evolved into the story of the Shi'ar, and how the Emperor of the Shi'ar, Deken, wanted the Emkron Crystal, and his sister was heading up a rebellion with the Starjammers, who the leader of the Starjammers was like his long-lost dad, and that's a whole convoluted backstory. And basically, she recruits the X-Men because she runs to Earth, and Xavier has this psychic connection with her where they fall in love over telekinetically or something. And yeah, so the X-Men then show up and they fight the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, and in the end the Phoenix goes in the Emkron Crystal and, using the life force of all the X-Men, manages to seal it and stop it destroying the universe, and that is the end of the Pheonix Saga. So takes on the Pheonix Saga, Ben.
It's one of my favourites. I mean, I really love it. It's just so epic, you know. We've got this big grand space battle. We've got, you know, the relationship with Lilandra and, you know, Deken as the villain. And, you know, it's really interesting, you know, developing on the Summers, you know, family with the Corsair and the Starjammers. And for me, it was really cool to see Jean developed as well, because now Jean is one of my favourite characters, and I just think for a while Jean was just always there and, you know, wasn't developed, in my opinion, as much as she could have been, as were, you know, quite a few females in Marvel at the time. So
she was the woman on the team who was there to be Cyclops' girlfriend for a while.
Exactly. So it was good to see, you know, the character expansion, and, you know, to see her going from someone, you know, being, as you said, you know, the woman on the team, just being there, to you know, being this, you know, godlike entity. I just thought it was great stuff.
Yeah, and it showed what the X-Men will become, because, you know, straight away, apparently the reports go that Claremont fell in love with Jean Grey, and he was really annoyed when Len Wein got rid of her during his story stuff. And as soon as he got the chance, which was like 5 issues in, he brought her back. So that whole goodbye from Jean was really mattered nothing, because Claremont brought her straight back. And she actually wasn't living with them. She was living with Misty Knight in her apartment.
Oh, wait, what?
Yeah.
Misty Knight?
Misty Knight.
The Afro lady?
Yes.
Yes.
She was living with her.
Oh my god. I didn't know that at all.
There was actually a really good Iron Fist fight with some of the X-Men with was it, I forgot who it was, but I remember, I want to say it wasn't Sabretooth, but I remember there was an Iron Fist issue where the X-Men were in it. And then that's when you still had Wolverine, where he took, I think, Fang's costume from the Imperial Guard.
Oh.
Interesting.
I think Claremont was also writing Iron Fist at the time, so he might have brought
was
that.
nuts. But yeah, he brought it back, and then straight away, he chose the woman of the team, and they really, in a way, the reason she was got rid of was because they had Storm now, and it's like, oh, we've got a woman on the team, we don't need two. But Claremont was like, no, I can do this with her, and then they made, you know, the female of the team the most powerful mutant of them all, and from that point onwards, you know, she's remembered as being one of the greatest X-Men characters ever, from the Pheonix Saga, and it really comes from that.
Several reboots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one. She was never really dead. Yeah. People say that Jean was never really dead, okay? She never came back to life. There was clones and alternate daughters and all that stuff, but she never actually came back to life. Joe, what about you, the Pheonix Saga?
Well, I mean, I liked most of it, but when I read the part where, you know, they connected the X-Men to the Starjammers, you know, with the Cyclops and his dad, I was kind of like, did you really have to go there type thing? Because it just didn't, for me, it didn't quite kind of make sense at the time, but everything else I liked. To me, it just seemed like that was just like a convenient connection to form an alliance type thing.
Yeah.
And then to get people to connect to the Starjammers. but then everything else was great. I loved the space battles. I loved seeing the Imperial Guard. I mean, just seeing the Imperial Guard alone, it was like, while I could see similarities to other characters, I just loved the battle between them and the X-Men. And
even with
that
his
was
big
like probably
blue mohawk.
yeah, you know, Fang, you can see was obviously Wolverine, and they had that other guy who was like Colossus. You know, just you can see where they got their ideas from, but it was just nice. Yeah, it was just a great battle, and I really liked seeing Jean Grey change. You know, to me, she was always seemed to be in the background, but then when she became Pheonix, and that brought her up to the front.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that Jean Grey's become this epic character that everybody knows, but in a way, the Pheonix, who in retcon wasn't her, made Jean Grey, you know, the popular character that she is, whereas Jean Grey as Jean Grey isn't as popular.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I think actually later on they merged the two, so she was actually Pheonix, but originally, you know, from the retcon, she was not Pheonix. She was just Marvel Girl, and at this point, it's a cocoon at the bottom of the ocean. Why Pheonix is impersonating her, but no. Again, you know, Pheonix Saga is incredible stuff, and you know, I do prefer the later stuff because again, the Imperial Guard just seem a little silly to me, and they just like just the costumes at the start. I mean, the X-Men straight away, man, but and stuff like that. And it is very fun. It is very fun. It's much more the sprawling space opera and stuff like that. So it's good stuff.
Can I ask you a quick question, Carl?
Mm-hmm.
I know you're not a big fan of how the Phoenix origin was dealt with in X-Men 3, so I was just wondering which you prefer, the movie version or this integrated
Oh god, yeah,
version?
this version. I mean, no matter what, every other version, other than that god-awful piece of crap, has the Phoenix being this possessive entity. And here it's from space, or it can be from Taiki. But so long as it's this possessive cosmic entity, I like. You know, I'm a big fan of the Phoenix. You know, the Phoenix as it is, the big firebird, the possession. I don't mind whether the possession is some sort of telekinetic entity or whether it's a cosmic entity, so long as it is a possession. I don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
she becomes the Phoenix, and for that point she pretty is the Phoenix on the team. She's actually an X-Man for a while. Straight away after that, they've got this great issue where they're hanging around in the mansion, and Alpha Flight are introduced. They straight away, you know, Weapon X said they'd send somebody after Wolverine, and they do. They send his old team, and straight away get introduced characters like North Star and his twin sister and Sasquatch. They actually got their own book for a while, which I'm not sure whether or not Claremont wrote that, but
was that in the 80s or the 90s? I know John Byrne did it
straight away. I think the 70s, so the 70s and 80s. It didn't last too long, but Alpha did get their own book, and here they were trying to collect Wolverine, and he says no, and they somehow end up shooting more, and that pisses Banshee off, and then they all fight, and then eventually they agree to disappear. But some interesting. Now, what goes on with Vindicator? Because when he's introduced, he's called Guardian. Then he's Vindicator, and then I think he gets another name as well. But the whole backstory with them wouldn't be released till later. The whole thing with Vindicator and the whole backstory, of him, you know, helping Logan become a man and all that stuff. But no, here they're just. Anybody fans of Alpha Flight?
I actually do like Alpha Flight. They're the only Canadian team that's out there, and I guess that's enough for Canada. But I do like Alpha Flight.
Well, Guardian's got his, or Vindicator's got his giant maple leaf on him, so I guess he's the Canadian version of Captain America.
Yeah.
I just think that nobody knows how to handle them.
No.
You know, because it's a very unique team with Snowbird and Sasquatch on it. You know, it's very mystical in a sense.
Yeah, sure.
And it's, you know, like you can either take it to a traditional superhero route where you fight more traditional villains, but then you also have like the gods and you know, like, mythical creatures involved, and then that's where things, you know, sometimes I think people don't like lose interest or they can't connect to the series as much. Plus they keep dying. That's the other problem.
I think one of the main problems is they keep going against, like, the big stories you keep hearing from Alpha Flight is that they're going against the government, and the main story is doing that. The main comic that's coming out there right now is doing the same thing too. So I guess they just keep rehashing the same government plot, but I don't know what's going on with Alpha Flight. I guess what you said makes sense too, but I don't know.
We mentioned Proteus quickly earlier, but I'll ask all of you, what's your do you like the Proteus story?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I liked it.
Oh god. I wish more would have been done with Proteus, and the stuff that happens afterwards, Colossus. There isn't too much done with him afterwards, but they do mention that he does feel bad for killing Proteus. But I wish more was done with the stuff that happens.
Yeah, that's what's weird is he does outright kill Proteus, but then when he like half kills or doesn't kill or thinks he kills a guy during Mutant Massacre, he goes like mental. So what's the difference? I guess Proteus was gonna kill loads of people, and there was no choice, I guess.
I mean, like during the Dark Phoenix Saga, he's like on the plane, says, "I can't believe I killed somebody," and then it's just over. I mean, yeah. I just wish more was done with it, but it makes sense.
For those of you who don't know, Proteus is the son of Moira McTaggart, who basically possesses. He's too powerful for his body. He leaves his body and he possesses other bodies, and he has basically an unlimited power set, from what I can tell. I think he's supposed to be telekinetic or something, but he can warp matter and all that sort of stuff. And he tears up Scotland until the X-Men take him down, where Colossus has to kill him, as we mentioned. Ben, what about you, Proteus?
Yeah, interesting character, but I agree. I think they could have done a bit more with him. But it was interesting, and he was a villain, through and through, and having him be the son of Moira, someone who the X-Men rely on, and eventually, someone on Charles's team has to kill Moira's son. It was an interesting dynamic, and he was a bit of a powerhouse, but yeah, he was okay. He was okay.
Yeah. What I found before I actually, read in detail X-Men, I'd always get Proteus and Legion mixed up.
Yeah.
They're merged, and one's Charles's son and one's Moira's son, and then they were together, but they didn't have a child. So it's like, oh my god, it's so confusing. That's the X-Men for me, I guess, though. So yeah, other characters introduced during this era. Again, we mentioned Mystique, but she was introduced in another book, and Magma, who would later become a New Mutant. I think she's introduced as Alison Crespia, but later obviously will become Amara. All right.
We also get Shadow King too.
Oh yeah, wasn't he like not an X-Men villain? Like he was. Again, he was.
He's more of a Professor Xavier villain and Psylocke villain, but yeah, he's an X-Men villain.
Yeah, because there's a lot of villains who were introduced in other books. I mean, even Wolverine was introduced in another book, and Mystique was a Miss Marvel villain, who became X-Men villains because Claremont were like, "Oh, I like them. You're not using them. I'll bring them into my X-Men, and I'll make."
Don't have too many blue girls here. Let's do that.
Yeah, blue seems to be the favorite mutant color.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, this is right on the end of the decade, but again, it goes into the 80s, and there's so many sagas in the 80s that we may as well cover this one now, why we don't have as many. The Dark Phoenix Saga. It begins at a whole massive build-up where Mastermind and the Hellfire Club find out about Jean's powers and they want to control the Phoenix. So Mastermind, disguised as Jason and Weingard, begins to torment her mind and begin to get into her head and start toying with her and slowly turn her, when they introduce Dazzler. During this, there's a couple of characters introduced. They have a belief that Dazzler and Scott are flirting and stuff and making her see what they want to see, and then slowly turning her more, breaking her mind, bringing that whole thing in where there's that fantasy of her being in the 17th century and all that stuff, the 18th century, and completely warping reality for her. During this Dark Phoenix Saga, obviously two major characters are introduced, one more popular than the other, Dazzler and Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde was picked up during this, and Jean would in fact show that she was turning to the dark side by the fact that she wipes Kitty Pryde's parents say, no, Kitty's not going to your school. So she just wipes her mind and says, and what's funny about that is everybody's like, Jean, how could you do that? He's like, Professor X did that all the time in the other issues. They practically kidnapped freaking Blob in the first couple of but yeah, at this point, that's wrong, and it shows what she's becoming and stuff. And Scott's like, oh shit, what's going on with her? And then, of course, towards the end, when we finally get into the main meat of the story, introduction of the Hellfire Club, the original Hellfire Club, Sebastian Shaw, Emma Frost, who actually wasn't there during the main fight because she's apparently killed or taken out by Pheonix when the team are kidnapped during the Kitty Pryde issue. So she's almost kind of a Kitty Pryde villain, which is, that'd come back later. She becomes a New Mutants villain later on. And of course, other characters like Donald Pierce, who's a cyborg, and what's the other guy's name? The Gravity guy.
Is it the fat guy you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, Leland.
Leland. And no Celine yet, but I think Tess is there. And the inner circle of the Hellfire Club are basically... They use a metropolitan strippers club. They were in the movie recently, if you have seen that, but they were in a different form. But that's pretty much what they are. They're like a club that's within a a private gentleman's club, who are actually all mutants or cyborgs who want to take over the world. Of course. As mutants, and to do that, so they kidnap Jean Grey and rewrite her mind to make her think that she's in the 18th century in the Hellfire Club and she's the Black Queen and all that. And then we get a rather disturbing issue where they kidnap the X-Men and she's backhanding Storm as a black slave, and it's like, ooh, stuff like that, because she believes in the 18th century. And of course, during this, we'd get the issue that would really create, because this point, I'm just rambling on here, but at this point, Wolverine was introduced as a guy who was not as powerful, or he was basically getting his ass kicked for the majority of the things, and he had this tough guy attitude. He was a bit rebellious and he was fun, but he was getting his ass kicked. I mean, during the Pheonix Saga, the whole thing of the claws being in his hands was introduced, and they were so not sure what he was or what was. All that mystery was starting to be introduced of who he is, what his real name is. To this point, in fact, until the 80s, they didn't even know his real name. He wasn't even called Logan, for crying out loud. It was just called Wolverine. But then finally in the issue Wolverine Alone, during the Pheonix Saga, was finally when he becomes the Wolverine that's pretty much him. This is the issue that makes Wolverine as popular as he is today. He's on his own, and he basically does this kind of Clint Eastwood thing, I know what you're thinking, and all that stuff, to this Hellfire Club. He just bashes his way through all the Hellfire goons and fights into the thing and manages to start a fight, which frees Jean Grey from her mind control after Cyclops is stabbed psychotically. With her psychic reporter Scott, it eventually breaks it, and the fact that, that she killed Scott and all that. Breaks her out of the mind control from Mastermind, and while the fight's going on, she turns to Mastermind and basically the Dark Phoenix. So the Phoenix personality is at that point completely taken over, and she goes apeshit on him and basically lobotomizes the guy. And then from that point onwards, her costume turns red, and she becomes the Dark Phoenix. So we're going to go to... There's so much to cover, and I'm just rambling here, but the first part of the Pheonix Saga, all that stuff with the Hellfire Club, Kitty Pryde, all that stuff before we get to the, the whole Space Age stuff, and I'll go to Joe first.
Well, overall, this was I guess you can say this is probably one of my favorite story arcs ever for the X-Men. Just for what you mentioned earlier, I mean, this made Wolverine the badass that he really is now. Just watching him go down to the sewers and taking out all those Hellfire Club members was at the time, I was like, oh my god, this has never, it's been seen before. Then, you have the total transformation of Jean from good into evil, and, you usually never saw things like that. And just watching, as a kid, I remember just reading this, and this was thinking this is the greatest thing ever. And I think if we never had this story arc, I don't know if I would still be a true X-Men fan that I am now, because of that.
Yeah. Just think of what's introduced during this. This is remembered as, for most people's mind, the greatest X-Men storyline ever, the greatest X-Men story ever, for a reason. It introduces Kitty Pryde, it introduces so much, and it does the whole Dark Phoenix thing. And again, it represents how good Claremont is. He built up and built up and built up, and slowly did this whole mastermind plot where Jeeva's been turned and turned and turned, and then finally she gets controlled, and then that makes her go absolutely nuts on people. It's just turns her into Dark Phoenix, as you know. The slow build, mate, and the serialized nature of the X-Men was really brought out by this saga. Andrew, what about you, the Dark Phoenix Saga, the first half of it?
I was just really amazed about how much they were able to bring up, and I know it's like the first part was like 5 issues, right? And the second half was the next 6.
I think so, yeah.
I was just amazed how much they put up in that, like, they brought in that first 5 issues. Like, Wolverine finally became this totally fleshed out badass. The Hellfire Club was one of the few teams that could totally wipe out the X-Men. Jean Grey doing her whole transformation thing was just great to see. It had all these elements of great drama, great action, great mystery, great all this stuff, and I was just, I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that you're right. I mean, the fact that all this stuff is rehashed over and over again. This is pretty much a lot of the X-Men that today keeps being rehashed from there to keep going back to the Hellfire Club. They keep going back to the Phoenix because this was so good and so popular. This is the arc that made the X-Men as big as they became in many ways.
My only problem with the first half was the mind fight thing.
Oh yeah.
He and Mastermind have this big sword fight in these classic old costumes, and he basically stabs Cyclops in the chest, like you said. And afterwards, he just gets back up like nothing happened. And he still has a psychic connection with Jean Grey. So,
I think it says that Jean's mind saved him or something, and that's what broke her out of the trance.
Well, yeah, but like my problem is like now your connection with Jean Grey's gone, and then later on they still have a connection, which is just weird. I don't know. That's the only problem with that for me. Everything else is just fantastic. I love it.
What about you, Ben? The first half of the Phoenix Saga.
I've got to start by saying Dark Phoenix Saga is probably my favourite X-Men saga of all time. It's just genius, and the first half, you guys have pretty much covered it. We've got the introduction of Kitty. We've got Logan, finally becoming the badass, character that that has become an icon now, and. The whole stuff with the Hellfire Club, we've finally got a team that really seem a really serious threat, and it just builds and builds on the drama, and it's so well written. Claremont's on top form. It's so character driven, and there's always something happening, and I just think it's executed so well.
What you bring up a good point with the Hellfire Club. These are the first they have a gimmick, but this is the first non-costumed villains for the X-Men. These are like more kind of serious socialite kind of characters.
This is like the first team to actually beat the X-Men.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. They pretty much whipped them until Wolverine turned up.
Yeah.
And of course, I think we'd be remiss without mentioning. During the first few, when they start working together as a team, is when the fastball special is introduced, and pretty much that turns badly on Leland because he uses gravity powers on Logan as he's falling towards him. He's like, "Oh shit!" He realizes what he's done. Bang! That takes him out.
What I love most about this run is that it's got so many like pump up your hands moments, like. When everybody's at their lowest point, and all of a sudden somebody comes to save the day. It's like, oh yeah, they did it. Yeah, and they're all excited.
Gives his character a chance to shine, because during that whole arc when Magneto took him over and took him to the volcano place and all that, Storm was the one who rescued them, and everybody gets a chance to shine during these. Colossus was the one who killed Proteus. Wolverine's the one who saves them here. Every character, which is something that the X-Men is sorely lacking nowadays. Every character gets serviced.
I'm almost surprised that Kitty Pryde stayed with the X-Men. I mean, because think about it. Here's these guys that say, come join our school, and then right when she agrees, she gets attacked by the Hellfire Club.
Want to join our school? Sure. You might need to deal with some terrorist attacks and occasional assassinations. Yeah. But it's a good school.
It's a good school.
This bitch in a goddamn burlesque white costume is going to kidnap them, and she has to help save them and all that stuff. And then Jean Grey wipes the parents and lets her go.
You might need to wear a series of bad costumes, but you'll be pretty good.
And have a series of really bad names until you finally settle on Shadowcat. But you'll have to...
Ariel?
No.
Was she called Ariel at one point?
Sprite.
Sprite.
I just think of the lemonade. And then Ariel, and then finally Shadowcat.
Yeah.
Which is brought up fantastically in Astonishing X-Men by Emma Frost again. Emma Frost and Kitty. I love that relationship. Which is pretty much started in the issue we were just talking about. Alright, then the second half of the Pheonix Saga goes back to the elements introduced in the Pheonix Saga as the Shi'ar turn up, and they because Jean goes nuts, she goes off planet, and this was, toned down if you've seen the animated version of this, which was, a fantastic adaptation of this, but they toned it down from this because she destroys a sun and kills an entire solar system, including an entirely populated planet, and the Shi'ar are like, oh crap, we've got to destroy this entity before it does anything else. And as soon as Xavier manages, she comes back to Earth because Jean Grey's personality gets her to come back, and she goes around her family home. But during that, Beast actually rejoins the team for a little bit. He's on and off at times. Beast rejoins them. He has this scrambler, which allows Professor X to enter Phoenix's mind and have Jean Grey's personality become the dominant one and lock Phoenix away. But just as you think everything's going to be alright, bang, the Shi'ar turn up and they say Jean Grey must die because the Phoenix is too powerful, and we'd pretty much figure out that they were right later on. The Phoenix could not be controlled. And Professor X scans Lilandra's mind and finds out about this ritual, which if he challenges her to this battle of the battle for the person's battle in the person's name, then they can free her, and they do this thing. But they've got the whole universe on their side with the scrolls and the Kree and all that sort of stuff. So pretty much every race ever teams up against them and whips this man's ass. Jean dresses up as Marvel Girl during the fight, but then what's great is the symbolism of that. She starts as Marvel Girl, and then she becomes Phoenix, and then Dark Phoenix. Just the transition of her character is done within 5 minutes, and it shows the Phoenix cannot be controlled. She eventually realizes that and runs in front of a gun, allowing the gun to turn on, and pretty much commits suicide because she realizes that she can't fight Phoenix every second of every day and lets herself be killed. At this point, that was the end of Jean Grey. She was killed as the Phoenix. That was her last act of her heroism, to kill herself, so to stop her other personality taking over and destroying the universe. Which
that didn't really work out, did it?
No, because this, of course, will be retconned and all that stuff later on. But the original version is so dramatic of how just the fantastic story of how a hero became bad and then eventually would turn good just enough to sacrifice himself. It's one of those quintessential old story things that just work so well. Of course, now the whole thing with Jean has been changed since, which kind of impacts it. So I'll go to Andrew first. Your thoughts on the second half?
I actually like this. I like the second half much more than the first half of the Dark Phoenix Saga, because we delved in a lot more of the personal aspects of Jean and Cyclops, and the whole team's reaction to her becoming this all-powerful, like dark, mystical, dark being, and they all just freak out, and they all show their true sides to what they feel about Jean Grey and what they might have done if she did go rogue. It has one of my favorite comic book fights ever, with them fighting the Shi'ar Empire. It's great stuff. There's so much more to say about it, but I'm going to make it short and just say this is just a really fantastic send-off to Jean Grey, and just one of the best X-Men stories ever.
Ben?
Yeah, X-Men is so character-driven, and, as I said, the first half, it really built up and up and up. And then the second half, it really continues it. And, Jean's one of my favourite characters, and, the character progression she goes through, it's heartbreaking. She goes from hero to an all-out villain that's unstoppable in the reality is, she is a threat to everyone and everything. And, there's a scene, in the second half where Jean begs Cyclops, to kill her. And that's heartbreaking to watch. And even though I'm not a big Cyclops fan, the relationship between Scott and Jean in this, it is an integral part of the story. And, it's very, very moving to watch, making, the ending, at the time at least, very powerful. This is the end of Jean, and really, I guess it had to be done. I think originally they actually planned for Jean to survive, but just to get depowered. But at the end of the day, it was decided, she's going to have to, pay for her actions, and so she was killed. And it was just amazing. And getting back to the Shi'ar as well, it was great seeing them again. And when they have the big fight with them, it's awesome stuff.
They get their ass kicked.
Yeah. They had the Skrulls, the Kree, and like 50 other people. Despite
like Leandro says, we cannot allow them to win. We're just going to overwhelm them. They got no chance. Yeah, you bring up a good point. For those of you who either were introduced or saw this with the adaptation done by the animated series, that was the original ending. The way the animated series did it, where it was a possession that left Jean and then she went back to just being regular Jean Grey, was the original ending, as Claremont wrote it originally, and you can find it in the what ifs stuff. But apparently the editor stepped in and said, no, she killed the whole planet, she's got to die for this. And so,
well, it was actually Jim Shooter that came in, and said that. But then he wanted to, like, banish her on some asteroid, radioactive asteroid, so she would burn forever. Type thing.
I think they had this conflicting thing where, like, they wanted to keep her alive because she wasn't responsible for her actions, and then the other side was just saying she killed the whole solar system, dude. You gotta be responsible for something.
There's two takes on the Pheonix, and that was kind of thing. The way Claremont always took it when he was writing it was what the person that did all the bad stuff, the person that destroyed that sun, the person who fought the X-Men and did all that and wiped Jason Mygob was another personality. It was a multiple personality disorder, and the Pheonix personality was what did that. But the other thing was what a lot of people believed at the time was that actually was Jean, and her combined with the Pheonix entity perverted her mind to become, and she basically became, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And she became that character herself as Jean Grey. And that's the way that Jim Shooter took it, and that's why he said she had to be punished for it. Because it was Jean. In his mind, it was Jean and not a possession. Now, of course, that should be completely vindicated and all that stuff later on, because it not only became a possession, but it actually became that the body that died on the moon was not the actual Jean Grey. But I think the ending, again, this is an example of executive meddling actually helping the story instead of hindering it, because I think if Jean had lived, this story would not be as epic and not be as impactful and popular as it later became, because this story of Jean is like a tragic, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy, epic nature of the story, and that really comes from the fact that Jean dies at the end. It shows, what these people are willing to do and the stories they're willing to tell, and it affected the X-Men for years to come until, the real Jean Grey's return, quote unquote. Joe, what about you for this?
Well, like, for me, I mean, I liked the beginning part a little bit more, but I thought it ended really powerfully. And, like, I think I remember at the time that I was thinking there's just no way she's going to die. I figured, well, at worst case scenario, they beat him up, they do something to her, and it's business as usual. So when I saw the character Jean die, I was like, oh my god, she's actually dead. And it just caught me totally by surprise. And I was just, looking back, I definitely agree that was the right decision to do. It was just such an emotional it was such an emotional impact.
And the fact
Plus
she sacrificed herself deliberately as well made it better. It was like, for one moment, Jean took back over and said no.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I guess you could say.
Plus, I was about to say plus after her death, then you get the Cyclops angst afterwards.
Oh yeah.
And then it basically shocked the team. So I thought it had in terms of ongoing stories, it actually put them in a much better place rather than just basically start over again.
Because from this point onwards, just the impact alone, Kitty Pryde was added to the team. Cyclops was not the leader again after this because he came back occasionally, but he was never the official leader again until the Blue and Gold in the 90s. He was pretty much gone from this point onwards, and as I say, Jimmy dead. After this, Wolverine gets his brown costume. He almost reflected the darker nature of his character from the Hellfire Club stuff. And just pretty much it was so... From this point onwards, this was the story that impacted everything for the 80s until the return. Yeah, but this story for me is become the greatest ever because obviously the epic nature of it. But it represents all the facets for the X-Men in a way. You've got the whole recruiting of the mutants thing with Kitty Pryde. You've got the first half is very Earth-based and tells a very human story. The second half is very, outer space, sci-fi epic, but at the same time it's still about the people. And I think it represents everything, and again, it gives every character a chance to shine, really, which is something that makes this, what it is today.
Doesn't happen in too many team books anymore.
Definitely.
Like you said as well, it is a tragedy. Jean, while she's the villain in this, we're seeing a love story as well. Scott's love for her and the team's love for a friend, and seeing this decline. It's really emotional stuff and great writing from Claremont.
Oh God, yeah. Wordy. He loved to get his word count in. I don't know whether he was being paid by the word or not, but
I think that might be my other problem with the book is that it can be really wordy, but other than that, it's just fantastic stuff.
Oh, that recap at the start of one of the issues where it recaps the whole thing. It's like, yeah, I know, I read it all. Get on with it. But that was more, for people who picked it over that issue. That issue actually, I think, is the one where they're all hanging around. They're all questioning, are we doing the right thing here and that kind of stuff. That's another one.
Yeah.
So many great issues within this great story arc is what makes it, what it is.
And I think afterwards, once the story was done, he tried to recapture that same emotional impact, but I don't think he just recaptured that again because it was just too good, I guess you could say.
Well, I even remember the lead up to the final battle. It was just so moody. All the characters were like alone, reflecting or thinking about what's about to happen, and it just had such a tremendous build up.
Yeah. I think you bring up a great point in that from this point onwards, all the big events later on all try to be this.
Yeah.
Like everything X-Men always comes back to the Dark Phoenix Saga, it seems.
Because the one after this, there's two stories after this. There's the Days of Future Past, and there's the Wolverine two-parter. In the Wolverine two-parter, he's fighting off the Wendigo, and he's got to make a choice to see if he has to kill Snowbird or keep letting her get on this rampage. And I could tell he's just trying to bring that to the same emotional impact. I didn't know Snowbird too well to make it really care about.
I was going to mention that Logan actually at one point, during this whole thing, they get the whole thing of Logan falling in love with her. Not as much as it would be later on, but they do mention that Logan fell in love with Jean Grey as well, and then he goes to kill her at one point when she's depowered on Earth outside her family home, and he can't do that either. So neither of them can do the killing blow, and in the end it has to be Jean herself. Now I'm going to ask each of you, take out the retcon for now. Let's just take the story as it was originally written. Do you consider the Phoenix, as in the Dark Phoenix, to be a different personality? Do you consider it to be Jean Grey, or do you consider it to be a mix of both that was perverted? I'll go to Joe first.
I almost think that it really is a different person, just because Jean never really exhibited this type of behavior before. But then I can see where power corrupts, and maybe she allowed her more darker instincts to take over. It's kind of like, well, I can do this now, so I'm going to do it, rather than playing it straight and narrow. But like I said, it almost seemed to me like almost a totally different person.
Yeah. Again, though, it's a question of, is this her repressed personality? Is this, not in the way that the movies did it, but is this her dark side that's been allowed, that's come out with the Pheonix entity, or is this a complete and utter possession and it's just her body? Ben, what about you?
Yeah, no, I'm going to say it's a mix of the both. Because you really hit the nail on the head before, Carl, when you said about absolute power, brings about absolute corruption. And, Jean, we've never seen her, be like this before, becoming the Phoenix. But, everyone in the world's got baggage. Everyone's got, dark places in the mind and secrets. And this entity, the Phoenix, it's about power and destruction. And, having something like that inside her, is obviously going to go into the, darkest depths of her psyche. And, remembering as well, she's a telepath. So, mentally, this entity has access to all places in her mind. And I think it is a matter of her being corrupted by the Phoenix. The Phoenix is its own entity, and yes, it is possessing Jean, but I think it draws some of its power from Jean's psyche. That's my take.
Yeah, and again, what happened later on kind of tainted, because we know that the Phoenix Force is an entity turned to itself that could possess other people. Right. We know this wasn't the actual Jean Grey and stuff like that, so it kind of taints our view on it, coming from now as opposed to reading it back then. But I think that was how it's again. Claremont wrote it as a possession, and then the editor was the one who came up and said no, that was her. So it's interesting stuff. Andrew, what about you?
I'm kind of mixed on this. It's either A, the Phoenix is a really pissed off alien that can infect people's minds, or B, Jean Grey must have had some terrible stuff happening into her past. Like maybe her dad. I don't know much about Jean Grey's past. But maybe her dad was a drunk, or maybe her brothers were complete assholes to her. So maybe she kept on checked all those emotions deep inside her and didn't want to lash it out. And she was, this really nice person to everybody. And then when the Phoenix came in, it just slowly and gradually unleashed all that anger out. Maybe just, whenever somebody tells her I don't know, her opinion's wrong or something, maybe she'll basically just, I don't know, completely freak out and go crazy.
Yeah, so, she brings up a good point, Bender, what he said about the whole satisfying. She never destroyed that sun to destroy that sun. She destroyed it to feed on it. So all she cared about was satiating herself and desires.
Good point.
Yeah. So
think of it like Galactus too in Fantastic Four. He needs to eat planets to survive. Does that make him a bad guy, or
Actually, John Byrne did touch up on that a lot of the time, but we may never know. Maybe he's not a bad guy. Maybe he's a good guy. I don't know.
Well, I think wasn't Galactus supposed to be I don't want to say a tester, but he's needed to weed the galaxy off all the weak planets or something like that. Even though he kills billions of people, destroys countless worlds, he has a purpose, and they need to have him alive. And it's it almost looks like it's like natural selection, where if you're not strong enough to fight him off, then you don't belong in the universe type thing.
Very apocalypse.
Very apocalypse-like. But does hunger have a limit? Is it eat day by day, or is it just every few months or weeks he just continues to eat?
I think as soon as he eats, he's go get me another one.
And why does he only
go back to the kitchen?
Why does he only eat populated planets?
I have no idea.
The Silver Surfer used to, when he had his mind, he could be able to think for his own. I think he tended to try to find planets that didn't have life forms on it.
You try to find the biggest
every once in a while.
Yeah, I was going to say, of all the planets in our solar system, you go for Earth, the one populated planet. Anyway, but yeah, back to this. Well,
yeah, okay.
I think the best way to wrap up this era was with the Dark Phoenix Saga, and I'll go around to each of you and say, what does this era mean to you, and what do you think its impact was, and what are your favourite stories from the era? So I'll go to Andrew first.
Why did you put me on the spot? I think the Dark Phoenix Saga is one of my favorites. I do love the small Sentinel story, even with all its problems that came before it. I'm a big fan of Magneto, so that's obviously one of the big ones. Either it's a tie between Magneto, the Magneto story, the Alpha Fight story, or the Dark Phoenix Saga story. And the stuff that this era got done that I'm most surprised with is like how this era of the X-Men got the most stuff done. It got the most just creative stuff in there that everybody goes back to. It put in the Shadow King. It put in how Charles Xavier got his leg. Well, not that was somebody else. But how he basically just got that really. We saw Xavier went on these like secret missions himself. He wasn't just this guy in a wheelchair bossing people around all day. He did his own secret missions. It got the most character development done. It got the most interesting stuff done. Like we already knew. We got some insight on how Wolverine's past might have been. Jean Grey became a I can't talk today. I'm sorry. A more fully fleshed out character. Just it got the most stuff done. It got the most character development we haven't really seen before, and it put in so much new stuff that I don't think they can ever recapture that again.
No, definitely. The 70s and the 80s, with what Claremont was doing, the amount of stuff that was introduced that has basically been just rehashed since is incredible. Ben, what about you?
For me, this era is the real beginning. It's like you said last time, the 60s, it was fun, but, it wasn't really necessary. This was the real beginning. This is where X-Men started. It sowed the seeds for decades to come. We had amazing character development. We had some amazing storylines. We had villains and characters introduced that will, have payoffs much later on. And, it really became a really character-driven series from this point on, when Claremont took over. And, the change-up of the team, in the 70s, again, it was great. And, we mentioned earlier, bringing in a demonic German and a Russian and a black woman, more so than ever, I feel, a lot of people have always said, X-Men really represents the minority groups, and more than ever, the 70s expanded on that. And, as for the favourite stories of the era, it's got to be everything to do with the Pheonix Saga and the Dark Phoenix Saga. It's just top-notch stuff. But bring on the 80s, because I love it.
Joe?
I think this is like the last time we're ever going to see anything like this again, because not only was it fantastic storytelling, fantastic character development, but when are we ever going to see a brand new, like never seen before group of characters in a major title, and then that's your new cast? Just imagine what would happen to the Avengers or Justice League of America, where you got rid of pretty much everybody and then created a whole new team from scratch.
Oh, they've tried.
And you know what happens? It always fails. Because people don't want to read new characters. They want 6 different Spider-Man titles, 8 Wolverine titles, and stuff like that. So we're never going to see something like this again. And just looking at the Avengers title, that kind of almost proves it, because you have Wolverine and Spider-Man in there just to boost up sales.
Yeah, and how many times has the Avengers been progressed and the characters have changed, and there's been other Captain Americas and other different, but then they've always go back to those originals.
I think the problem with the Avengers right now is the stories are too long, and the thing with this X-Men stories in the 70s, the majority of them are like 3-part stories. They don't.
Right.
That's just comics in general now. A story that would usually take a one-shot back in this era we're talking about takes 6 issues now. It's
well, that's what Remender is doing right now. All the stories so far have been like 3-part stories.
Yeah.
Well, that's because they're writing for trades now.
Yeah.
You have to have so many issues to get the trade. We'll never see this again.
Yeah. But my other problem is, like, in the new Avengers stuff, you don't see character moments. All it is it's focusing on big guys like Captain America and Iron Man arguing, and giant dialogue captions. Michael Bendis does best. I don't want to see them arguing for, like, 10 pages. I want to see them doing superheroic stuff. I want to see characters, like, not Spider-Man, but what's the big adventure villain? The new Kree guy, Norvar. I want to see him doing something. I want to see guys like Moon Knight doing something. But no, they're all in the background talking and arguing about stuff they don't need to be arguing about. Yeah. And the stuff that, like the X-Men, they have people arguing, but they have stuff going on. They bring in new elements and stuff. And all I'm seeing in new Avengers stuff.
And usually the arguments pay off into a major plot point at some point.
Yeah.
Evolves into the
story.
And
like. And as I was saying with the story arc thing, it didn't drag on too long. You can go to the right next thing. If you miss an issue, okay, it's only 3 issues. So wait 2 more months, and then you're into the next story. So, it's perfect stuff that I think should be done more in comics, which Remember is doing right now. But, it can't. I don't think the new team writers are going to get that down to their heads. They're going to keep just rehashing the old stuff, which is a shame, but
Yeah, we'll certainly go into that when we get to the modern era about that whole problem. Right. Ben, you were going to say something.
Yeah, Marvel just the current state of it now. It's relying too much on the big events. It really, really is. I mean, with Avengers specifically. I mean, I did like a lot of the stuff Brian Bendis was doing, but when it got to stuff like Siege, that was.
Oh God, yeah.
That Siege was bad. I mean, we had a chance to really, get some good storytelling there, character development on, maybe Thor, Spider-Man, and it just didn't pay off as it could. And the state of the Marvel Universe now, it really does feel like, what's going to sell, let's add Wolverine in there, let's add Spider-Man. And for X-Men, while some of the stuff's okay, I can't help but feel that some of that's still going on, the vampire storyline, passion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I said it on the Wolverine the X-Men review, and I think that's what great to bring it back to this era. In this era, Wolverine was a part of an ensemble cast. Everybody got as much screen time as the other, with the exception of Cyclops and Jean Grey, who got more screen time occasionally, or panel time, whatever you want to call it. Whereas now it seems like the only characters who get any development are Wolverine, Cyclops, and Emma, and everybody else is just in the background. Storm, I said it in the Wolverine in the X-Men review. Storm will just show up and you're like, oh, Storm, where the hell were you? Well, it just shows up to you.
We talked about that not Twitter. Skypitch did. Like Storm, the only big stuff Storm gets into is with Black Panther stories right now. She isn't really even in the X-Men anymore. She's just there to be a powerhouse and just leaves.
Yeah.
And the thing that I hated about Matt Fraction's run, I didn't read too much. It's probably my fault, but his stories are so decompressed. And he kept on focusing on Scott and Emma too much. I got just totally uninterested about it. I didn't want to.
I'm a huge fan of Scott and Emma, but I want to see other people as well. I want to,
Yeah.
Before he died, Nightcrawler was doing sweet fuck all. To be honest with you.
Yeah.
So.
Nightcrawler was barely even in.
Yeah. All right then. So that will wrap it up for our. Let's save this discussion for the when we get onto the modern era. That will wrap it up for our discussion on the X-Men in the 70s. Again, as we said, it was when the X-Men, as we know them, were created. It was pretty much everything came from this, from the in on this in the 80s. So next time we'll be back, hopefully with Captain Logan next time, and maybe a couple of other people. We'll see what happens. And next time we'll do the 80s, which again continued to expand the X universe. We got 2 extra titles, some spin-off issues, and things like that, and a whole franchise began. And Wolverine became, this powerhouse he's become now. Okay, so thank you guys for joining me. Awesome stuff, and see you next time, guys.